How do you monetize the show?
For a long time, it was nothing. I was just putting the show out.
Yep.
And then eventually, like you said, you put so much time and effort into it, and you're like, it's not even about reaping the rewards. I got to offset this time I'm putting in. So about a year back, I had merch made. I sold a bunch of merch. I was like, okay, but I don't like how taxing this is. I had to go find a supply. I tried going online and doing those. Upload your image, we'll print it and we'll send it.
Yeah, the print on demand, yeah.
But I would get a couple sample copies to my house and they were garbage. So that went out the window. Then I went, found a local supplier. A whole nother nightmare. But I got this stuff made and then I sold it and I'm like, I don't want to do that again. So then Patreon enters the chat, right?
What is up, action takers? Welcome back to the After Hours Entrepreneur. I'm really excited to share this interview here with you today that was completed at PodFest. Super fun, point and shoot style. I just posted up at the bottom of a very busy place in the conference hall, and I just started interviewing some awesome people, and I think you're going to be thrilled to hear how these people are turning their passion into profit. Stay tuned, sit back, relax, make sure you subscribe if you haven't yet, and let's get into this episode of the After Hours Entrepreneur. Run the tape.
Abbas, what's up?
Thanks for having me, Mark.
Yeah, I'm glad to chat with you here at PodFest.
Right in front of the sign, in case I forget what it's called. But like it's a cheat code, like PodFest.
Yeah, real quick, it's right there. It's nice to have reminders. We have these handy name tags too, which are helpful too.
You got to lift them up and
yeah. So, boss, tell me about your podcast.
Well, I got a podcast called the Immigrant Section, and it's pretty much a bunch of comedians and actors and artists, and I also have people on like academics or just people that are just interesting. Anytime I talk to a person that's charismatic, has kind of an immigrant story, is a child of immigrants or an immigrant themselves, I invite them out. I got a little studio set up in my house, and it's on its third leg. It was at a fancy place, and then it was in my basement, and I moved, and it was upstairs. But it's been 3 years going strong. Comedy, kind of Rogan-esque when I first started it. I like the one-on-one style, just like this right here. And I'm just here to realize how to unlock the potential, as they say in PodFest.
I love that. So 3 years, all in-person interviews.
Yes, sir.
Right? All immigrants.
No, the pandemic, I had to pivot to Zoom.
Sure.
But besides that,
yeah. So what's the motivation? What's the purpose? What's the reason, right? Because I think a lot of people get into podcasting just because they want to talk about something, but what's the end game for your show?
Well, when you start doing stand-up comedy, there's some lore that hits you right when you get in the game, which, whether it's accurate or not, that's another discussion. But when you get into stand-up, they tell you, get a podcast, get into acting.
Really? Okay.
Those are a package deal with stand-up comedy for some reason. Now, do I agree with that? Years down the road, I don't. But I'm from Sudan. I was born in Sudan. I moved to Canada when I was 6. I'm based out of Toronto right now. The podcast is based out of Toronto. Everything I do is based out of Toronto for the moment. But growing up, I would always have these. In my high school, there was a section that all the immigrants would hang out in. There'd be this loud corner that had no furniture in it. And everyone called it the Immigrant Section, even white people. They'd be like, oh, I saw him in the immigrant. It's like, yo, did you see Ahmed? Oh, I think I saw him in the Immigrant Section. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So I kicked off a podcast, and there was always this vibe in the Immigrant Section that I didn't hear I was a big podcast fan, commuting a lot and stuff. And, at the time, as most immigrants do, I have an engineering background. I obviously got an engineering degree per law as an immigrant. Per law, I didn't want to get arrested, right? So I did what I had to do, right? But yeah, there was just this vibe that was there that, with the lore of start a podcast, I was like, yo, let me recreate that thing. And what's the name to call it? The Immigrant Section.
So part of the reason why I love this name, Abbas, is it's very clear what the show is about. It's about immigrants. You're bringing immigrants together. It's clever.
I like to think of it as that one foreign food section of the grocery aisle, the Immigrant Section. Yeah.
Sure. I can dig that. So I want to kind of talk about monetization a little bit, right?
Okay.
Because a podcast takes a lot of work.
Absolutely.
A lot of work. How do you monetize the show? How do you generate income revenue so you can actually keep the show rolling?
You know what? There's been waves of it. That's a great question. For a long time, it was nothing. I was just putting the show out.
Yep.
And then eventually, like you said, you put so much time and effort into it, and you're like, it's not even about reaping the rewards. It's I gotta offset this time I'm putting in, you know,
because it impacts your family, your friends.
exactly. I stopped engineering after 3 years of doing engineering. I stopped it completely and just kind of focused on everything else. So it's like a massive income drop.
Yeah.
So at some point, and more recently, I brought on a producer, which I pay out of my pocket.
Yep.
Now you can see I'm wearing Immigrant Section merch. So about a year back, I had merch made. I sold a bunch of merch. I was like, okay, but I don't like how taxing this is. I had to go find a supply. I tried going online and doing those. Upload your image, we'll print it and we'll send it.
Yeah,
It's
print on
once-
demand. Yeah.
But I would get a couple sample copies to my house and they were garbage.
Yeah.
And one was great, but it was like you're paying $65 for a hoodie, which no one is going to buy except three of your most diehard people, right? So that went out the window. Then I found a local supplier, a whole nother nightmare, but I got this stuff made and then I sold it and I'm like, I don't want to do that again. So then Patreon enters the chat, right? And then it becomes a question of how do you actually get people on Patreon? Because you've been giving them this free thing for so long. And a lot of people, at least from my point of view, it's like, I have this free thing. I see you're doing this and that. I don't know that you really need the money. I see, look at your studio. It's great. Money has to be coming from somewhere. What people don't realize is that you are willing to front the money.
Right.
You know,
Like any business, right? You put a bunch of money up front and
they're like, there's lighting, there's cameras, he has money. No, dude. You know what I mean? It's like my friend does real estate. And for years, if I saw a real estate ad on a bus, I would be like, that guy's killing it. He's on buses.
right.
And then my friend got into it and I realized they drop thousands of dollars to get on those buses to generate leads. They don't have sales before the bus ads.
Right.
That came first. It's the chicken and egg thing.
Right.
So the whole reason of me, the whole impetus of me actually being here is to solve that very problem there.
Well, I think a big problem that, you know, because I've been on Patreon too, and a lot of problem that podcasters have is please support me by joining my Patreon. Spoiler alert, we're selfish creatures. We do things for us. We don't do things for other people, generally speaking.
I mean, that's all the whole point. Yeah, the podcast, right?
Yeah. So like, I guess the question then becomes, what is that extra carrot? What's the thing that you can really provide to your community? So what's your strategy for that?
I actually literally just recorded one. I do a solo episode every Friday. I'm a stand-up comedian, so a lot of the times I'll record some stuff behind stage or before a show or after a show or just some extra little tidbits of stuff that I'm like, if people like stand-up, if people like what I do, they're going to find value in this thing, right? But it's just getting them to this platform that a lot of people don't know. And I noticed that I'm in Canada, right? Americans are a lot more willing. And of course, a podcast goes outside borders. So I'm already reaching Americans, right?
Yep.
But I've noticed Americans are just a lot more willing to sign up to a thing they don't have than Canadians. They're just, they kind of avoid a platform they're not already on. You know, a lot of people won't go on Patreon and support you unless they're on Patreon supporting someone else.
Interesting.
Right?
Sure.
So it's like, it's that challenge of getting him to the thing, creating value, and being able to show the value you're creating on free channels.
Yeah.
So it's like, you got to cut a clip and put it on an Instagram and be like, full thing on Patreon. I do on the street interviews in Toronto where I'll go up, I'll ask him about, you know, Drake's CLB versus Kanye's Donda. I'll ask people about Ukraine, Russia. I'll ask people, I'll put little tidbits on the YouTube, on Instagram and be like, go to Patreon and check out the whole thing, right? And still not converting like I would think they would convert, right? I'm making really good content. People really love it, but I don't know how to bridge that gap. And again, the impetus of me being here, talking to experts, like I'm literally 3:00. I have the agenda thing. 10 steps for a successful Patreon community. I'm like, I'm going to that.
I love that. Yeah.
I'm going to that thing, you know? That's the whole thing I'm trying to figure out because I know a handful of podcasts that have successfully done it, have brought people over, have created value on that end. And it's not that I feel like the content they're creating is so much better than what I'm creating. It's not by any means. It's just they've somehow convinced and sold their community on the value they're bringing. And that's what I'm missing.
Speaking the language is really important, right? Because it sometimes it's as much as like one little word that you can change or being at the right time. So, you know, I run a mastermind community for podcasters. Last month we were talking about monetization and I actually started on Patreon. I started on Patreon, and some of the things that I noticed people, at least in my genre, were interested in was mastermind community, right? Getting people together to talk about different strategies, right? So that was a big takeaway. Another thing I've seen work out well is like at the end of your episode, you have like, let's say you have a 30-minute episode, then you have 15 minutes of exclusive content, right? That exclusive content, I think, is a big piece too. Because listen, if someone's going to listen to your podcast for, let's say, 30 minutes, pretty good chance they might be interested in another 10 to 15.
Absolutely. I do like hour-long podcasts. So it may be you give 40 minutes free, you cut off the last 20. But once you've been giving people, now
they're trained for the free.
I know, right?
Yeah.
That's the thing. So I have so many podcasts I love that I get the whole podcast.
Yeah.
And then I join the Patreon. Some I've supported. You know what? Like Flagrant 2 with Andrew Schultz. I got in on the tier just to see what they're offering, just to benchmark, see the landscape. That's really what I was seeing. What is the value on this end? And it's not so crazy. And still, my Patreon approach is still based off of the stencil that I saw they were following, right?
Yep. It's
just a matter of, I've noticed it's easier if you have a collective in the podcast. If they're a single group of people, it is easier to get people over to the Patreon because you've built this community. But the problem is I'm a guest-based podcast.
Sure.
So it's really, when you say support the podcast, I'm giving this one guy money. But when it's 3 voices you're tuning into every time, it's easier to wrap your head around supporting and getting in on that, right? Yeah. I'm just trying to like rationalize what's happening right
Another cool thing that I played with was announcing before a guest was coming on, hey, everyone, I'm getting this guest on. What would you like me to ask the guest? So now your Patreon members feel like they're actually part of the show. And then during the podcast itself, I did this with Daryl Eves. I had Daryl Eves on my podcast.
Okay.
Huge YouTuber. He runs Vid Summit, some huge, like, and before the interview, I asked the audience, who would you want me to bring? What would you want me to ask? Just my mastermind members. And then when I had Daryl on the show, I said, Daryl, this question is from Bez Rengifo.
Oh.
Do you have anything you'd like to tell him about this
People
question?
love a name drop, They're like, oh, I'm involved,
Exactly. And that was, especially, it's like, Cameo.
Yeah.
It's got kind of that Cameo feel to it.
I know Tiger Belly, the podcast, Bobby Lee and Kalila, they will just drop their highest tier. They just put those people's names at the end of the episode. That's the whole thing. Like, here's the inclusion of the people at the highest tier. You're producers now. So that is a whole nother ballgame of how do I get people to the highest tier?
Yeah.
How do I get people to Patreon? I'm at the first thing. Yeah. I'm trying to get that first step over, right?
Do you have the Patreon set up yet?
Oh, it's been going. I'm on 70 solo. I just did my 70th solo episode.
But Patreon, so it is. It's live.
Oh, yeah,
that's
for a year and a half.
Dig it.
Yeah,
All right, cool.
Like I'm putting stuff out there. It just becomes like, I know the value is there, educating the people on it, and just like you said, the verbiage. How do you get them there? And I actually just watched some guy who had like a pretty good like rubric of the wording, which I literally wrote that down. That was like one of the main things. I'm like, okay, let me do my next episode and use this wording where you really stress the timing of it, the value of it, and like the call to action rather than being like join, being like scroll down, click the join link in the description rather than just being like join it. Be like go to the thing that says this.
Specific call to action.
Very specific, very specific.
Yeah. Boss, this is awesome. I'm really glad we got to talk about Patreon. Why don't you tell everyone your name, the name of your podcast, and why they should be at PodFest?
And why they should be at PodFest?
Right.
Who's watching this? Is it podcasters? Is it creators?
We're all after-hours entrepreneurs. We're trying to turn passion into profit. A lot of podcasters.
Well, if you like this type of vibe, there's 1,000 people here with this type of vibe. So if you want to network, if you want to learn, if you want to have these type of conversations, that's what this whole thing is. If you turn this camera, there's 100 people grouped up having this exact conversation everywhere. From my end, my name is Abbas Wahab, ABBASWAHAB. My podcast is called The Immigrant Section on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, all the platforms. Patreon, obviously, I think I've driven that home at this point. But thank you for having me, and thanks for talking.
Yeah, Abbas, quick rapid fire. You ready?
Let's do it.
Favorite animal?
Tiger, Siberian tiger.
Ooh, I like that one. Scariest movie you've ever seen?
Probably The Exorcist, the original Exorcist.
That's 3 in a row, by the way.
Yeah.
You're on a plane ride. You can sit next to anybody. Who would you want to sit next to?
Dave Chappelle.
Ooh, that's a good one. Good one. Pineapple on pizza, yay or nay?
Pineapple on pizza?
Yeah.
Do I like it?
Yeah.
I do not like it. I do not like it, Mark, and I do not like that you asked that.
Listen, I'm indifferent. You like pineapple? You don't like pineapple? It's all good. Okay, final question. If you had 10 seconds with yourself 10 years ago, what do you say?
Relax. You don't have to do engineering. It's all going to be fine. Whatever you end up doing, your mom, dad, they're going to come around. Relax. You got this. Just relax.
Boss, thank you, brother.
So much fun, dude. So much fun. This was a blast, man.
Well, thanks for listening today. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the After Hours Entrepreneur. So many great people out there taking action. And I love sharing their stories with people just like you. And listen, if you're into podcasting, if you're trying to grow your podcast into something that can actually generate real revenue and real profit, let me help you. Let me help you. That's what I'm here to do. I've been working on this for over 5 years now, and I want to help you turn your podcast into profit. Click the link below and join the Podcast Mastermind community. It is very affordable, and it's designed to help you turn your podcast into money, into cash money. That's what we're going to help you do. So listen, click the link below. Let's connect. Thanks for listening to After Hours Entrepreneur today. And I'll catch you here next time. Go take action, all right? Peace.